Marcus Chen had been cleaning the royal gardens of Zelthara for 3 Earth years. The alien nobility called him Custodian, like it was his actual name, never bothering to learn that he was once Dr. Marcus Chen, xenobiologist and father of 2. That life felt like someone else's dream now. The Zeltharan Empire had conquered Earth swiftly. Not through destruction, but through demonstration. Their ships appeared one Tuesday morning, hovering over every major city. When the governments demanded explanations, the aliens simply turned off the sun for exactly 60 seconds. In that minute of absolute darkness, humanity understood its place in the universe. Marcus survived the selection process that followed. The Zeltharans needed workers, not warriors. They sorted humans like livestock, determining who would serve where. Scientists became laborers. Soldiers became servants. Children became... Marcus tried not to think about what happened to the children. The royal palace of Queen Thessera sprawled across a continent-sized space station orbiting a dying star. The gardens where Marcus worked were a marvel of bioengineering, containing flora from 1,000 conquered worlds, trees that sang in harmonious frequencies, flowers that bloomed only in the presence of specific emotions, grass that changed color with the phases of distant moons. But the most precious plants in the garden were the tears of memory, crystalline fruits that hung from translucent vines. Each fruit contained the compressed life experiences of a being. When consumed, they granted temporary access to those memories, allowing the consumer to live entire lifetimes in moments. Only the royal family could touch them. The penalty for theft was immediate execution, followed by the erasure of the thief's homeworld from existence. Marcus had learned this rule on his first day. Overseer Krex, a beetle-like creature with mandibles that clicked when he spoke, had made the consequences very clear. "Human thing," Krex had said, his translator device rendering his words in mechanical English. "You clean, you tend, you never touch. Touch the memory tears and your entire species pays the price." Every day Marcus walked among those glowing fruits, watching them pulse with captured lives. He wondered whose memories they contained. Former royalty from conquered worlds, great artists whose civilizations had been wiped out, maybe even human memories, stolen from the children who had disappeared. The other human workers whispered among themselves during their brief rest periods. Chen the pilot, who now scrubbed floors in the servant quarters, Sarah the engineer, who polished the shoes of alien diplomats, David the teacher, who cleaned waste disposal units in the lower decks. They all remembered their old lives, but those memories felt increasingly hollow with each passing day. The Zeltharans had a gift for breaking spirits without breaking bodies. They provided adequate food, acceptable shelter, and medical care when needed. They weren't cruel in the traditional sense. They simply treated humans as useful objects, like particularly sophisticated cleaning tools. The lack of hatred made it somehow worse than outright brutality. Marcus had almost forgotten what defiance felt like until he heard the crying. It was during the evening shift, when the artificial daylight in the gardens dimmed to simulate sunset. Most of the palace inhabitants were at their evening meal, leaving the gardens nearly empty. Marcus was trimming the singing willows when the sound reached him, a soft, broken sobbing that seemed to echo from everywhere and nowhere. He followed the sound through winding paths lined with phosphorescent moss, past fountains that played melodies in colors instead of water. The crying grew stronger as he approached the heart of the garden, where the oldest and most valuable memory tears grew. There, sitting beneath the central vine, was a small figure in royal blue robes. Marcus froze. It was Prince Daith, Queen Thessera's youngest son and heir to the throne. The prince was no more than a child by Zeltharan standards, though his species aged differently than humans. His elongated features and silver skin marked him as pure-blooded royalty, but his tears were as clear as any human's. Marcus should have retreated immediately. Contact with royalty without permission meant death for him, and punishment for his entire work crew. But something in the child's expression stopped him. It was the same look he had seen in his own children's eyes during thunderstorms. When they needed comfort more than rules, the prince noticed him and scrambled backward, fear replacing sorrow in his large dark eyes. "Please," he whispered in accented English, "do not tell Mother. She must not know I was here." Marcus remained perfectly still, his mind racing. Why was the heir to the galaxy's most powerful empire crying alone in a garden? Why did he speak English instead of using the standard translators? And why did he seem afraid of his own mother? "I won't tell anyone." Marcus said softly, using the same tone he once used with his own children. Are you hurt? The prince shook his head but couldn't stop the tears. Grandmother died today. Mother says tears are weakness, that future emperors cannot show pain. But grandmother was kind to me. She taught me your language in secret. She said, the prince's voice broke. She said that conquered peoples have their own wisdom if we listen. Marcus felt something crack inside his chest. This alien child, heir to the empire that had enslaved humanity, was grieving like any child would. The realization was disturbing and humanizing at the same time. My grandmother used to make me soup when I was sad, Marcus found himself saying. She said that sharing food was how people shared strength. Prince Dythe looked up at him with curiosity cutting through his grief. Your grandmother? But you are... He struggled for the words. You are property. I was a father once, Marcus said quietly. I had children who cried when they were scared or sad. I had a grandmother too who taught me that kindness matters more than rules. The prince stared at him for a long moment, as if seeing him as a person for the first time. Then his gaze drifted to the memory tears hanging above them, their soft glow casting rainbow patterns on his tear-stained face. Grandmother's memories are in one of those, he whispered. But I cannot reach them. I am not yet of age to consume the tears, and she is gone forever. Marcus looked up at the crystalline fruits, each one pulsing with captured life. The punishment for touching them was absolute. But looking at this grieving child, Marcus found himself remembering why he had become a father in the first place, because some things mattered more than safety. The prince continued crying, and Marcus made a choice that would change everything. Marcus reached up toward the memory tears, his hand trembling as it approached the nearest crystalline fruit. The moment his fingers touched its surface, he expected alarms to sound, guards to come running, his life to end. Instead, there was only silence and the soft warmth of the fruit against his palm. The memory tear came away from the vine easily, as if it had been waiting to be picked. It was smaller than he had expected, no bigger than an earth apple, but it pulsed with inner light like a captured star. Through its translucent surface, Marcus could see swirling patterns of color and movement, fragments of someone's entire existence compressed into crystalline form. Prince Dythe gasped, his silver eyes wide with shock and terror. No, you cannot. The punishment will be mine to face, Marcus said quietly, kneeling beside the young prince. He held out the memory tear, its light painting both their faces in shifting hues. Your grandmother's memories shouldn't be locked away from someone who loved her. The prince stared at the fruit in Marcus's hands, his breathing quick and shallow. You do not understand. If Mother discovers this, she will not simply execute you. She will make an example. She will destroy your entire world, everyone you have ever known. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine, but he didn't pull his hand back. Then we'll have to make sure she doesn't discover it. But I cannot consume it without the ritual preparation. I am not yet of age. The memory tears are dangerous for young minds. They could trap me forever in someone else's experiences. Marcus looked at the fruit, then at the crying child before him. 3 years of servitude had taught him much about Zeltharan physiology and their technology. He had observed the preparation rituals from a distance while cleaning nearby areas. What if you didn't consume the whole thing? What if you just tasted it? Just enough to feel her presence one more time? The prince's eyes filled with fresh tears, but now they were tears of hope rather than despair. You would risk everything for this? For me, I am your enemy. My bloodline enslaved your people. You're not my enemy, Marcus said, surprised by the truth in his own words. You're a child missing his grandmother. That's something I understand no matter what species we are. Prince Dythe reached out with shaking hands and took the memory tear. The moment it touched his skin, the fruit began to resonate, its inner light pulsing in rhythm with the prince's heartbeat. Grandmother always said the memory tears choose their own timing. Perhaps she wanted me to have this. The prince brought the fruit to his lips and took the smallest possible bite. The effect was immediate. His eyes rolled back, showing only silver, and his body went rigid. For a terrifying moment, Marcus thought he had killed the future emperor of the galaxy. Then the prince's lips curved into a smile, and tears of joy began streaming down his face. Grandmother, he whispered. I can feel her. She's here. She's telling me. The prince's voice became distant, as if he were hearing something from very far away. She says the garden remembers everything. Every act of kindness. Every moment of courage. She says. She says you have a good heart, Marcus Chen. Marcus started. How does she know my name? The prince's eyes focused on him again, still glowing faintly with residual memory. Grandmother observed all the human workers. She convinced Mother to treat you better than the original plan suggested. She believed your species had value beyond labor. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. There had been worse plans for humanity, and a member of the royal family had intervened. He thought of all the other conquered species he had seen in the palace, the ones who seemed broken in ways that went beyond simple servitude. Why didn't she help us more? Marcus asked. She was dying, the prince said sadly. Her influence was already waning. Mother and the council saw her compassion as weakness, but she planted seeds, Marcus Chen, ideas that might grow when the time is right. The memory tear in the prince's hands was beginning to dim, its borrowed memories fading back into crystalline sleep. Prince Daith took one more tiny bite, closing his eyes to savor the last moments with his grandmother. She wants me to remember something, he said, his young voice carrying an odd gravity. There are others like her in the royal court. Zeltharans who question the Empire's methods. They meet in secret, speaking of change. Grandmother was part of something larger. Marcus felt a spark of something he had thought was dead. Hope. A resistance? Not resistance, the prince corrected. Evolution. Grandmother believed that empires which rely only on fear and force eventually consume themselves. She wanted the Zeltharan Empire to become something better, something that could rule through inspiration rather than intimidation. The prince carefully placed the remaining memory tear in Marcus's hands. Take this back to the vine. Make it seem as though nothing happened. But as Marcus reached up to replace the fruit, voices echoed from the garden's main path. Guards were coming, their heavy footsteps unmistakable on the crystal walkways. The prince's eyes went wide with panic. Hide, Marcus whispered urgently. Get behind the fountain. I'll handle this. But they will see the fruit is different. The light patterns change when a memory tear has been consumed. Marcus looked at the dimmed fruit in his hands, then at the terrified child before him. Without hesitation, he bit into the memory tear himself, consuming what remained of the grandmother's memories. The effect on a human mind was overwhelming. Marcus felt himself falling through layers of alien consciousness, experiencing decades of life in the span of seconds. He saw the Zeltharan Empire's history from the perspective of its royalty, the conquests, the justifications, the growing doubt among some of the leadership about their methods. He felt the grandmother's love for her grandson, her fear for the Empire's future, and her hope that beings like Marcus might help guide her people toward something better. When the guards found them, they saw only a human custodian tending to the memory tears, and a young prince sitting quietly by the fountain. The fruit Marcus replaced on the vine looked exactly as it should, full of stored memories untouched by curious hands. Prince Daith, the lead guard said, with a respectful bow. Your mother requests your presence in the throne room. The prince rose gracefully, once again every inch the future emperor. But as he passed Marcus, he whispered so softly that only human ears could hear. Thank you for the soup recipe. Marcus continued his work as the guards and the prince departed, but everything had changed. The grandmother's memories were now part of him, and with them came knowledge that could reshape the fate of both species. But most importantly, he had learned that even in the heart of an empire built on conquest, kindness could still plant seeds of change. The Queen's private observation chamber overlooked the entire heart of the garden. From this hidden vantage point, Queen Thessera had watched the entire exchange between her son and the human custodian. Her 4 hands were folded carefully in her lap, but her silver eyes betrayed a storm of conflicting emotions. She had come to the chamber to mourn her mother-in-law in private, away from the political necessities that ruled her public life. The old queen's death had been expected, but that didn't make the loss easier. Despite their philosophical differences, Thessera had respected the elders' wisdom, even when it clashed with her own pragmatic approach to ruling an empire. What she had not expected was to witness an act of compassion that challenged everything she believed about the conquered species under her rule. Through the chamber's advanced viewing systems, she had seen every detail: the human worker's hesitation before taking the forbidden fruit, the genuine care in his voice as he spoke to her grieving son, the selfless way he had consumed the memory tear himself to protect the prince from discovery. Most shocking of all, she had seen her son respond to the human's kindness with a depth of emotion she rarely witnessed from him. Queen Thesara had ruled the Zeltharan Empire for 47 standard years. She had conquered 17 solar systems, absorbed 43 species into her domain, and maintained order across a territory spanning half the galaxy. She had done this by understanding that power required absolute clarity. Subjects were subjects, rulers were rulers. Compassion was a luxury that led to weakness, and weakness led to rebellion. Yet watching her son's face light up as he tasted his grandmother's memories, facilitated by a human slave who risked everything for a moment of kindness, Thesara found her certainties cracking like ice under unexpected warmth. A soft chime indicated that her personal advisor, Lord Vex, had arrived. She did not turn from the viewing window as his elongated form entered the chamber, his ceremonial robes rustling against the polished floor. "Your Majesty," Vex said, bowing deeply, "I regret disturbing your private time, but there are urgent matters requiring your attention. The Human Integration Committee has submitted their final recommendations for the Earth sector." Thesara continued watching the garden below, where the human custodian was now calmly tending to other plants as if nothing extraordinary had happened. "And what do they recommend?" "Complete memory suppression for all human workers within 6 months. The committee believes that human creativity and independent thought, while initially useful for certain tasks, now poses a long-term security risk. They fear that human adaptability could eventually lead to organized resistance." The Queen's grip tightened on the viewing panel's edge. 6 months ago, she would have approved such recommendations without hesitation. Conquered species that showed too much initiative had historically proven troublesome. Better to ensure their compliance through neural conditioning than risk future uprisings. But now she thought of the human below, who had shown more genuine care for her son in 10 minutes than most of her courtiers displayed in years of service. "There is more, Your Majesty," Lord Vex continued. "The committee also recommends immediate execution of any human who shows signs of forming emotional attachments to members of the royal family. They cite security concerns and the possibility of manipulation." Thesara turned from the window, her expression carefully neutral. "Show me the committee's complete files on the human workers." Lord Vex activated a holographic display that filled the chamber with floating data streams. Personnel records, productivity reports, and behavioral assessments for thousands of human workers across the Empire appeared in neat, categorized formations. "Find the file for Marcus Chen, Garden Custodian, Level 7, Thesara commanded. The data reorganized itself, bringing one particular file to prominence. Marcus Chen's image appeared alongside detailed records of his pre-conquest life and his years of service to the Empire. "Xenobiologist," Thesara read aloud. "Specialization in interspecies botanical adaptation. Published 47 research papers on plant genetics. Father of 2 children, both lost during the integration process." She paused. "And his current assignment?" "Routine garden maintenance," Lord Vex replied. The committee felt his scientific background made him unsuitable for any position involving Empire research. Too much risk of him understanding our technological processes. Thesara studied the image of Marcus Chen, seeing not the broken slave she had expected, but a man whose eyes still held intelligence and dignity despite years of servitude. His productivity ratings? Exceptional. He has improved garden yields by 37%, and successfully cultivated several species that previous workers could not maintain. However, the committee notes that these achievements demonstrate dangerous independent thinking. The Queen dismissed the holographic display with a gesture. Through the viewing window, she could see Prince Dythe returning to the garden, walking with the measured steps of someone carrying a precious secret. The young prince approached the human custodian, and though she could not hear their words, she saw them exchange what appeared to be a brief but significant conversation. Her son looked happier than she had seen him in months. "Lord Vex," she said slowly, "what was your assessment of my mother-in-law's influence on imperial policy?" The advisor shifted uncomfortably. "The former queen was wise in many ways, Your Majesty. However, her tendency toward lenient treatment of conquered species was viewed by many as potentially destabilizing. And yet, during her period of greatest influence, we experienced the longest period of internal peace in imperial history. Correlation rather than causation, surely." The Sarah moved away from the viewing window and activated her personal communication system. I want to review all Human Integration Committee recommendations before any implementation. Postpone the memory suppression program indefinitely. Lord Vex's eyes widened. Your Majesty, the committee will strongly object. They have already prepared the neural conditioning equipment. Then they can prepare explanations for why their recommendations require further review. The Sarah said firmly. I also want a complete audit of human worker assignments. Any human with advanced scientific or educational backgrounds who has been assigned to menial labor should be flagged for reassessment. With respect, Your Majesty, such a review could be seen as questioning the committee's authority and competence. The Sarah's expression hardened. The committee's authority derives from my approval. Their competence is exactly what I'm questioning. As Lord Vex left to carry out her orders, clearly disturbed by this unexpected policy shift, Thessera returned to the viewing window. The human custodian was now working alone, but she noticed something different in his movements. There was a purposefulness there that hadn't existed before, as if he was carrying knowledge that had transformed his understanding of his place in the universe. She thought of her son's joy when he tasted his grandmother's memories, and of the human who had made that moment possible, despite the enormous personal risk. She thought of the grandmother's belief that empires built on fear alone were doomed to destroy themselves. Most of all, she thought about what kind of empire she wanted to leave to her son. For the first time in decades, Queen Thessara was considering the possibility that her mother-in-law might have been right about the value of mercy. The human in the garden below continued his work, unaware that the most powerful being in the galaxy was watching him, and wondering if one act of simple kindness might be the seed of something far greater than conquest. 3 days after sharing the memory tear with Prince Dythe, Marcus noticed subtle changes throughout the palace. Human workers were being reassigned to new positions, some moving from menial labor to roles that actually utilized their skills. Dr. Sarah Kim, the engineer who had been polishing shoes, was suddenly transferred to the palace's Environmental Systems Division. Chen Wei, the former pilot, found himself working in the navigation department of the Royal Fleet. Marcus himself received new responsibilities in the garden. Instead of simple maintenance, he was asked to develop cultivation plans for rare botanical specimens from newly contacted worlds. For the first time in 3 years, he was being treated as a scientist rather than a tool. The changes were noticed by everyone, but no one dared speak of them openly. The Zeltharan guards and administrators seemed as puzzled as the human workers. Orders were orders, regardless of how unexpected. They might be. It was during his 4th day of expanded duties that Marcus encountered her. He was analyzing soil samples in a previously restricted section of the garden when a shadow fell across his workstation. Looking up, he expected to see Overseer Krex or another functionary. Instead, he found himself staring at Queen Thessara herself. Marcus immediately dropped to his knees as protocol demanded. His heart hammered against his ribs as he waited for accusations, for guards to seize him, for his theft of the memory tear to be revealed. Instead, the Queen spoke in a voice that was surprisingly gentle. "Rise, Marcus Chen," she said in perfect English, without the mechanical translation that usually accompanied royal communications. "I wish to speak with you directly." Marcus stood slowly, keeping his eyes fixed on the ground. "Your Majesty." "Look at me," she commanded, but again her tone held no anger. When Marcus raised his eyes, he was struck by how much the Queen resembled her son. The same silver skin, the same large dark eyes. But where Prince Dythe's face held youthful openness, the Queen's features showed the weight of absolute power. Yet there was something else there, something that hadn't been present in their few previous encounters. Uncertainty. "You have consumed the memories of my mother-in-law," the Queen said. It was not a question. Marcus felt his knees weaken. This was it. This was how his defiance would end. "Your Majesty, I do not deny it. I observed the entire interaction between you and my son. I watched you steal a memory tear to comfort a grieving child. I watched you consume the remaining fruit to protect him from discovery." The Queen's 4 hands clasped behind her back as she began to pace slowly around Marcus. "What I do not understand is why." Marcus searched for words that might save his life, but found only truth. He was crying. He missed someone he loved. I have children too. Had children. The Queen stopped pacing. Had? They were taken during the selection process. I don't know where they are or if they're still alive. Marcus's voice cracked slightly, but I remember what it felt like to comfort them when they were afraid. Queen Thessara was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice held an emotion Marcus couldn't identify. Tell me about my mother-in-law's memories. What did you experience? Marcus knew this could be a trap, but the weight of the borrowed memories compelled honesty. I saw her love for your son, her fear that the Empire was becoming something that would ultimately destroy itself, her belief that strength and compassion could coexist. He paused, then added quietly, She wanted you to succeed, Your Majesty, but she worried about the path you were choosing. The Queen's expression tightened. The path of order, of stability, of preventing the chaos that destroyed the civilizations we encountered before we brought them into the Empire. She didn't disagree with those goals, Marcus said, surprising himself with his boldness, but she believed there were different ways to achieve them. In her memories I saw some of the species that were completely broken during integration. The ones who lost not just their freedom but their will to exist. She believed that was unnecessary waste. Queen Thessara turned away from him, looking out over the garden where her son was currently attending his afternoon lessons. And what do you believe, Marcus Chen? What does a human think about the necessity of imperial control? Marcus chose his words carefully. I think your mother-in-law was wise. Fear can create temporary order, but it also creates resentment. Resentment grows in the dark until it explodes. But respect, he gestured around the garden. Respect creates loyalty, and loyalty is stronger than fear. You speak of respect while addressing the being who enslaved your species. I speak to the mother who loves her son enough to notice his happiness, Marcus replied, and to the ruler who is questioning whether her current path is the right one. The Queen turned back to him, and for a moment, Marcus saw past the imperial facade to the uncertainty beneath. The Human Integration Committee recommends memory suppression for all human workers. They believe your species is too dangerous to remain cognitively intact. Marcus felt ice in his veins. Your Majesty, I have postponed their recommendations indefinitely, the Queen continued. But I cannot postpone them forever without justification. The committee fears human rebellion. They point to historical examples of conquered species that eventually overthrew their conquerors. She studied Marcus intently. Are they right to fear this? The question hung between them like a blade. Marcus understood that his answer would determine not just his fate, but the fate of every human in the Empire. They're right that suppressing our minds would prevent rebellion, he said slowly, but they're wrong about what would make us rebel. We don't fight because we remember our freedom. We would fight because we were denied the chance to earn our place. He gestured to the thriving plants around them. Give us meaningful work. Treat us with basic dignity and most humans will serve loyally. But break our minds and you'll create the very hatred they fear. Queen Thessara considered this for several minutes. And if I were to experiment with this approach? If humans were given opportunities to prove their value as thinking beings rather than just laborers, some would abuse it, Marcus admitted. Any species has individuals who choose destruction over cooperation. But most of us just want to build something meaningful with our lives. Give us that chance and you'll have allies, not slaves. The Queen nodded slowly. The committee will resist this approach. Many in my court believe that showing mercy to conquered species is a sign of weakness. Your mother-in-law showed mercy to your son by allowing him to grieve. Did that make her weak? A slight smile touched the Queen's lips. No, it made her wise. She turned to leave, then paused. Marcus Chen, you will continue your botanical research, but you will also serve as an unofficial advisor on human integration policies. Your insights may prove valuable in the coming changes. As the Queen departed, Marcus realized that stealing a single memory tear to comfort a crying child had somehow changed the trajectory of human history within the Zeltharan Empire. The grandmother's memories had planted seeds of change not just in him and the prince but in the most powerful being in the galaxy. But he also understood that this was only the beginning. Changing an empire built on conquest would require more than royal good intentions. It would require proving that mercy could be stronger than fear, and that respect could create deeper loyalty than subjugation. The real test was yet to come. 6 months after Marcus's conversation with Queen Thessara, the changes in the palace had become impossible to ignore. The Human Integration Committee was in chaos. their authority undermined by a series of royal edicts that reversed decades of policy. Memory suppression had been banned. Humans were being reassigned based on their actual skills. Most shocking of all, a handful of humans had been promoted to advisory positions within the imperial bureaucracy. Lord Vex stormed into the Queen's private study, his ceremonial robes billowing with indignation. "Your Majesty, the situation has become untenable. 3 committee members have resigned in protest. The Korthax delegation has formally questioned our commitment to proper species management. And now I'm told you've approved the construction of a human cultural center." Queen Thessara looked up from the report she was reviewing. Detailed analyses of imperial productivity since the policy changes began. The numbers were encouraging. Human worker efficiency had increased by 43%. Incidents of sabotage and work slowdowns had dropped to nearly 0. Most significantly, several human workers had voluntarily reported genuine security threats, including an attempt by a recently conquered species to infiltrate the palace's communication systems. "The cultural center will occupy 1 level of subsection Gamma," the Queen said calmly. "Hardly a significant allocation of space." "Space is not the issue," Lord Vex protested. "The symbolism is what concerns the court. Allowing conquered species to maintain their cultural practices sends the wrong message about imperial authority." "And what message is that, precisely?" "That we view them as equals rather than subjects." Queen Thessara set down her reports and gave her advisor her full attention. "Tell me, Lord Vex, in the past 6 months, how many security incidents have we experienced from human workers?" "Well, there have been several reports. How many actual incidents?" Lord Vex shifted uncomfortably. "None that resulted in actual damage or injury." "But Your Majesty, the potential for what? Rebellion from workers who are more productive, more cooperative, and more loyal than they have been at any point since integration?" The Queen stood and moved to her viewing window, which overlooked the same garden where everything had changed 6 months ago. "Lord Vex, I want you to see something." She activated a holographic display showing productivity statistics from across the Empire. Human-operated facilities are now outperforming Zeltharan-operated equivalents in every measurable category. Agricultural output is up 60%. Manufacturing efficiency has increased by 55%. Research divisions that include human scientists have produced more innovations in the past 6 months than in the previous 3 years combined. "Success in productivity doesn't negate security risks," Lord Vex insisted. "A productive slave is still a slave. Given the opportunity, they will attempt to overthrow their masters." "Perhaps," the Queen acknowledged. "Or perhaps they will become so invested in the Empire's success that they will defend it as their own." To demonstrate her point, she accessed another file. 3 days ago, Dr. Sarah Kim discovered an attempt by the Vorthan separatists to introduce a computer virus into our navigation systems. She could have allowed the sabotage to succeed, potentially crippling our fleet. Instead, she reported it immediately and worked 18-hour shifts to develop countermeasures. "Why do you think she chose loyalty over revenge?" Lord Vex had no ready answer. "Because she is no longer a slave maintaining someone else's empire," the Queen continued. "She is a valued engineer protecting a civilization she helps to build." Through the viewing window, they could see Prince Dythe walking through the garden with Marcus Chen. The human was explaining something about the seasonal bloom cycles, and the prince was asking eager questions. The relationship between them had grown into something approaching genuine friendship. "Your Majesty," Lord Vex said carefully, "there are rumors that your son has become overly attached to the human custodian. Some in the court question whether this relationship is appropriate for the heir to the throne." Queen Thessara's eyes hardened. "And what do these rumors suggest?" "That the prince's judgment may be compromised by misplaced sentiment. That his future decisions as emperor could be influenced by inappropriate emotional attachments to conquered species." The Queen was quiet for a long moment. "Lord Vex, do you know how my son learned about the flowering of Carolus?" The advisor blinked in confusion. "The traditional ceremony? It has been part of royal education for centuries." "Yes, but how did my son learn to perform it correctly?" "The ceremony requires precise timing and understanding of subtle biological processes. Previous heirs required years of study with our best scholars. I assume he received the standard educational protocols." "He learned it from Marcus Chen in 3 afternoons," the Queen revealed. The human's expertise in botanical sciences allowed him to explain the scientific principles underlying the ceremony in ways that made intuitive sense to my son. Dythe now understands not just the actions of the ritual, but the reasons behind them. She turned from the window to face her advisor directly. This is not an inappropriate attachment. This is education of the highest quality, provided by someone who combines scientific expertise with genuine care for my son's development. Marcus Chen may be human, but he is also the most effective teacher my son has ever had. Lord Vex struggled to process this information. But the precedent, Your Majesty. If word spreads that the prince receives instruction from a conquered human, word will spread that the prince receives instruction from the most qualified teacher available, regardless of species. This is pragmatism, not sentiment. The conversation was interrupted by Prince Dythe himself, who entered the study with Marcus following at a respectful distance. The prince was practically glowing with excitement. Mother, you must see what Marcus has discovered. Tell her about the symbiosis patterns. Marcus stepped forward, clearly uncomfortable with addressing royalty so directly, but encouraged by the prince's enthusiasm. Your Majesty, while analyzing the memory tear vines, I noticed that they form a complex network of root connections with other plants in the garden. The vines aren't just individual plants. They're part of a larger organism that shares nutrients and information across the entire garden. The implications are extraordinary, Prince Dythe added. If we understand how this natural network functions, we could apply the principles to improve communication systems throughout the empire. Different species sharing resources and information for mutual benefit, just like the plants. Queen Thesara looked at her son's animated face, then at the human who had inspired this insight. And you believe this biological model could have practical applications for imperial administration? It's possible, Your Majesty, Marcus said carefully. Natural systems that thrive long-term tend to be based on cooperation rather than dominance. The strongest organisms are usually those that create beneficial relationships with their environment, rather than simply controlling it. Lord Vex's expression grew increasingly alarmed. Your Majesty, surely you cannot be considering restructuring imperial governance based on botanical observations from a human slave. I am considering learning from anyone who offers useful insights, the Queen replied. And I am beginning to think that our definition of useful expertise has been unnecessarily limited. She dismissed Lord Vex with a gesture, then addressed her son and Marcus. I want you to prepare a full analysis of this symbiosis model and its potential applications. If your theories prove sound, we may have discovered a new approach to imperial administration that could benefit every species under our rule. As they left to begin their work, Queen Thesara reflected on how much had changed since that night in the garden. A single act of compassion had triggered a cascade of consequences that was reshaping the empire from within. But she also knew that the real challenges lay ahead. Changing policies was one thing. Changing the fundamental nature of a civilization built on conquest would require something, even more difficult, changing minds, that had been shaped by centuries of tradition. The test would come when the rest of the empire learned what was happening in the royal palace. The rebellion began on Kepler Station, 12 sectors away from the royal palace. Commander Zex of the 3rd Imperial Fleet received reports that human workers in the mining facilities had organized work stoppages and were demanding what they called rights. The commander's response was swift and traditional, overwhelming force to crush the uprising. Before it could spread, what Commander Zex did not expect was for the humans to be joined by members of 3 other conquered species who had been watching the changes in imperial policy with growing hope. What began as a simple labor dispute evolved into a multi-species resistance movement that captured 6 mining stations and 2 supply depots before imperial forces could respond. Effectively, the news reached Queen Thesara's throne room during what had become known as the Integration Council, a weekly meeting where human advisors worked alongside traditional imperial administrators to address policy concerns. Marcus Chen was presenting his analysis of agricultural improvements when the emergency communication arrived. Your Majesty, the holographic image of Commander Zex appeared in the center of the throne room. I regret to report a coordinated uprising in the Kepler sector. Multiple species are involved, and they appear to be using sophisticated communication networks to coordinate their actions. I request permission to implement Protocol 7. Protocol 7 meant complete sterilization of the rebellion zones, eliminating all life regardless of species or loyalty. It was the traditional Imperial response to organized resistance. Queen Thesera felt every eye in the throne room upon her. The traditional administrators were watching to see if she would abandon her experimental policies in the face of actual rebellion. The human advisors were terrified that their entire species would be blamed for the uprising. Prince Dythe, now 16 and actively participating in Imperial governance, looked stricken at the thought that his mother's merciful policies had led to bloodshed. "Commander Jex," the Queen said carefully, "what evidence suggests that this rebellion is connected to recent policy changes regarding human integration?" "Your Majesty, the humans in this sector have not been subject to the new integration protocols. They are operating under the previous system of strict containment and labor assignment. However, intelligence suggests they have received information about the policy changes in the core sectors and are demanding similar treatment." Marcus Chen stepped forward, a breach of protocol that would normally result in immediate punishment. "Your Majesty, may I speak?" Queen Thesera nodded, ignoring the shocked expressions from her traditional advisors. "Your Majesty, if these humans are rebelling because they've heard about improved conditions elsewhere, then this isn't a failure of your new policies. It's proof that they work. The humans here aren't fighting because they have too much freedom. They're fighting because they have too little." Lord Vex, who had remained silent during recent council sessions, finally exploded. "Your Majesty, this is exactly what the Integration Committee predicted. Give conquered species hope, and they will demand more and more until they challenge Imperial authority itself." "Actually," said Dr. Sarah Kim, who had become the lead human technological advisor, "the situation may be more complex than it appears." She activated a portable analysis device. "I've been monitoring communication patterns across Imperial networks, and I've noticed something interesting about the Kepler uprising." A holographic display showed the sector map with communication flows highlighted in different colors. The initial rebellion was indeed started by humans, but look at these coordination patterns. The other species didn't join spontaneously. They were recruited using very specific persuasion techniques that suggest outside influence. Prince Dythe studied the patterns intently. "You're suggesting this isn't a natural uprising?" "I'm suggesting someone with detailed knowledge of Imperial communication protocols and species psychology has been orchestrating this rebellion to coincide with your mother's policy changes. The timing is too convenient to be coincidental." Queen Thesera felt a chill of understanding. "Show me the communication origins." The display shifted to reveal transmission sources. Most originated from within the rebellion zones, but several key coordination messages had come from a single source. A Zeltheran military vessel operating under diplomatic immunity in a neutral sector. "Admiral Korath," the Queen said, quietly. Lord Vex stepped forward, his expression shocked. "Your Majesty, Admiral Korath is a hero of the Empire."
He would never. He would if he believed my policies threatened Imperial security," the Queen interrupted.
"He's created a crisis to force me to choose between my new approach and immediate military necessity." She turned to Commander Jex's image. "Commander, delay Protocol 7 implementation. I'm sending additional support, but not in the form you expect." The Queen deactivated the communication, then addressed the Integration Council. "We have an opportunity to prove that the new approach works even under the most challenging circumstances. But it will require courage from everyone in this room." She turned to Marcus. "How quickly can you prepare a delegation of human advisors for transport to Kepler Station?" Marcus looked stunned. "Your Majesty, you want to send humans to negotiate with human rebels?" "I want to send people who understand what those rebels are really fighting for. Traditional force will only prove Admiral Korath's point that conquered species cannot be trusted. But if we can resolve this crisis through negotiation and genuine reform, we prove that strength and mercy can coexist." Prince Daith stepped forward. "Mother, I volunteer to lead the delegation. As heir to the throne, my presence will demonstrate the Empire's commitment to peaceful resolution." "Absolutely not," Lord Vex protested. "Your Majesty, you cannot risk the heir in a rebellion zone. The political implications of sending the prince are exactly what we need." Queen Thessera said. We must show that we have faith in our new policies. Half measures will convince no one. Dr. Kim looked up from her analysis device. Your Majesty, I'm detecting something else. The other species in the rebellion, the Vortons, Kesseli, and Duran, they're not actually fighting alongside the humans. They're in separate groups making different demands. Someone is trying to create a multi-species coalition, but it's artificial. The grievances don't align, which means we can address each group's concerns separately, Marcus realized. Instead of treating this as a monolithic rebellion, we can approach it as several different problems with different solutions. Queen Thessera nodded approvingly. Precisely. Commander Zek sees a rebellion that requires military force. Admiral Korath sees a validation of his fears about conquered species. But what we actually have is an opportunity to demonstrate that imperial governance can adapt to address legitimate grievances. She stood and activated the general communication system. Attention all fleet commanders in the Kepler sector. By royal decree, no military action will be taken against the mining stations until a diplomatic solution has been attempted. Any commander who violates this order will be court-martialed for insubordination. The message was clear. The Queen was betting everything on the belief that her new approach could work even in the most difficult circumstances, but as the Integration Council prepared for the mission to Kepler Station, everyone understood that failure would not only doom the experimental policies, but would likely result in the complete suppression of every conquered species in the Empire. The seeds of change planted by a single act of kindness were about to face their greatest test. The royal transport arrived at Kepler Station 18 hours after the rebellion began. Through the viewports, the delegation could see the mining facilities surrounded by Imperial ships maintaining a careful distance. Energy barriers glowed around the captured stations, preventing escape, but also preventing the traditional bombardment that would have ended the crisis in minutes. Prince Dythe stood at the command deck wearing formal diplomatic robes rather than military armor. Beside him, Marcus Chen clutched a datapad containing detailed proposals for addressing each group's specific concerns. Dr. Sarah Kim monitored communication frequencies, tracking the artificial coordination patterns that proved external manipulation. Your Highness, the ship's captain reported, we're receiving multiple transmission requests. The rebel groups want to negotiate, but they're insisting on speaking only to Imperial leadership. Grant the requests, Prince Daith replied, but establish separate communication channels for each species group. Dr. Kim was right. Their demands are different, and we should address them as separate issues. The first holographic projection showed the human rebel leader, a woman named Elena Vasquez who had been a terraforming engineer before her world's conquest. She looked haggard but determined, flanked by other humans who still bore the physical marks of harsh labor. Your Highness, Elena said, her voice steady despite the circumstances, we're honored by your presence, but we know this is likely a trap. Why should we trust Imperial promises when every previous negotiation has ended in memory suppression or execution? Marcus stepped forward. Because some of us have already experienced what you're fighting for. My name is Marcus Chen. 6 months ago, I was a garden custodian. Today, I'm a scientific advisor working directly with the royal family. The changes you've heard about are real. Elena's expression shifted from suspicion to disbelief. You're the botanist from Earth. I read your papers before the conquest. What are you doing here? Proving that the Empire can change, Marcus replied. But only if we can demonstrate that change works even under pressure. The conversation continued for 2 hours with Marcus and Prince Daith explaining the new integration policies in detail. Elena's demands were reasonable. Restoration of human cultural practices, assignment based on actual skills rather than punishment labor, and representation in local governance decisions. More importantly, she agreed to separate human grievances from the other species' issues. The Vorthan delegation proved more challenging. Their leader, Commander Torek, had military experience and strategic knowledge that made him dangerous. But Dr. Kim's analysis revealed something crucial. The Vorthans' primary grievance wasn't with their treatment as conquered subjects, but with their exclusion from Imperial military service. My people are warriors, Torek declared during their communication. We were not defeated in battle. We were overwhelmed by superior numbers. But instead of being offered the chance to prove our loyalty through military service, we are treated as laborers and technicians. This dishonors our entire culture. Prince Daith exchanged glances with Marcus. The solution was obvious, but it required a level of trust that no empire had ever shown to recently conquered peoples. Commander Torek, the prince said, if I were to offer your people the opportunity to earn positions in the Imperial fleet through a structured integration program, would that address your primary concerns? The Vorthon leader's eyes widened. You would trust us with weapons and ships? We would trust you to earn that privilege through demonstrated loyalty and competence, just as any other Imperial citizen might. The breakthrough came when they addressed the Kasali concerns. The species had been conquered only 2 years earlier, and their grievance was simple. They wanted their children back. Imperial policy had separated Kasali families during integration, sending children to educational facilities, while adults were assigned to labor duties. Dr. Kim accessed Imperial records and discovered that the separation had been unnecessary, a bureaucratic overcaution rather than a security requirement. The Kasali children were healthy and unharmed, but they had been prevented from contacting their families for nearly 2 years. We can reunite your families immediately, Prince Daith announced to the Kasali delegation. The separation was an administrative error, not a policy requirement. The Kasali leader, an elderly female named Weeping for Stars, broke down completely upon hearing this news. You would do this? Return our children, even though we have rebelled against Imperial authority? You rebelled because you were denied something that should never have been taken away, the prince replied. Reuniting families isn't a concession to rebellion. It's a correction of an injustice. By the end of the 3rd day, the artificial coalition had collapsed entirely. Each species group had found solutions to their specific grievances, and the energy barriers around the mining stations were lowered. More importantly, Admiral Korath's manipulation had been exposed when Dr. Kim tracked the coordination signals back to his vessel. But the real victory came during the closing ceremonies. When Elena Vasquez approached Prince Daith privately, Your Highness, she said, I need you to understand something. We didn't rebel because we wanted to destroy the Empire. We rebelled because we wanted to belong to it. Everything we've heard about the changes in the core sectors, the respect, the meaningful work, the recognition of our skills, that's what we've always wanted. And now you have it, the prince replied. Now we have the chance to earn it, Elena corrected, which is all we ever asked for. The return journey to the royal palace was triumphant, but Marcus found himself standing alone in the observation deck, thinking about everything that had changed since he had picked a single memory tear to comfort a crying child. The Empire was transforming, species by species, sector by sector, into something that resembled the grandmother's vision of cooperation rather than domination. Prince Daith joined him at the viewport. Marcus, do you think we've really changed the Empire? Or have we just postponed the inevitable conflict? Marcus thought about Elena's words, about the Vorthons eager to serve alongside their former conquerors, about the Kasali families that would be reunited because someone had bothered to check the records. I think, Marcus said slowly, that we've learned something your grandmother always knew. An empire built on fear can conquer worlds, but an empire built on respect can conquer hearts. And hearts are harder to break than planets. The prince smiled. She would have been proud of what we accomplished here. She would have been proud of you, Marcus corrected. You chose to trust in mercy when every tradition told you to choose force. As the royal palace grew larger in the viewport, Marcus realized that the true revolution hadn't been the rebellion at Kepler Station. The true revolution had begun 6 months earlier, when a human custodian had chosen to risk everything for a simple act of kindness, and a queen had chosen to forgive him for it. The Zeltharan Empire still spanned half the galaxy, still commanded vast fleets and controlled countless worlds, but now it was becoming something new. An empire that conquered not just through military might, but through the radical idea that different species could work together as equals, and it had all started with one stolen fruit, given freely to ease a child's grief. In the garden of memory, the smallest acts of compassion often grow into the mightiest trees.